Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Hypnosis. This is the Hypnosis time effects processor from Dreadbox, the Greek manufacturer. You know, I'm very fond of their synthesizers, and from what I've heard of this, you may have heard actually, I did a Fun Friday synth jam just with the Erebus here and the Hypnosis, and I thought it sounded great together. What is the Hypnosis? Well, as you can see, it's a very charmingly styled 80s time effects processor livery. This is all down to the brilliant work by Dimitra, who does all of the graphic design and the sort of layout stuff together with Yanis, a brilliant team there. I really like this kind of cut. In fact, I wish I had a sort of dressing up box. I would have worn some kind of shell suit with a Shazam stripe across it, just in homage, but you'll be pleased to know I don't own any of that gear. But back to this guy. Essentially what we have here are three separate effects modules in one. You can't address them individually, as in, you know, discreetly, but you have a stereo in and a stereo out. The chorus flanger is true stereo, the delay is true stereo, but the spring reverb is mono. And yes, it is a spring reverb. You can hear that because when I hit it. The other thing that you get is when you run the sound into it, there's a pink, nice pink, hot pink LED that gives you an idea of what the level is as well. So those individual effects are all capable of giving you some quite lush sounds. In fact, the other thing to mention is there's no real other connections on here at all. I mean, there's no MIDI, there's no CV control, which I think is a bit of a shame because it's quite fun to tweak some of these things. There's also the ability to store the settings of all of these knobs, not the input and the output or the bypass state, in 49 memory locations here. So you can set up some nice effects. If we just go through the individual sections, you'll be able to kind of hear roughly what's going on here. So if I'll switch the chorus flanger on first, let's start with the time right down. Bring the depth in, feedback up. And as we bring it up further, we get into the sort of chorus range, but the feedback allows us to get some really nice, interesting effects here. One thing that's also pretty cool about this is you don't have just that standard wave. Pressing and holding on the button here gives you three modes. First mode, it just sounds like a regular sort of sine. This one sounds a bit more like a triangle. And then if we go to the third mode, we get sample and hold. Which actually sounds really nice and is quite useful. I think in the Fun Friday thing, I use it as a sort of tempo, rhythmic element. Problem is though, it's completely free running. There's no way to sync that. And again, you know, it would have been so lovely because there is obviously some digital stuff going on in here. It'd been really lovely to be able to have some kind of synchronization, because obviously, you know, with all of our other modular things or MIDI, but, you know, I guess it might have added to the cost. And that's one thing I should probably get out of the way straight away. It's not a cheap unit. It's about $500 US, 500 euros. And I've spoken to Dreadbox about this and said it does seem a bit pricey. And he said, yes, because it's a true stereo affair, some of the chips in there are quite expensive, and obviously you're doubling up on those, so it adds to the cost. I wonder whether or not it might have been more prudent to think about making it mono and giving it a little bit more features or dropping the price down. But I'm not a synth designer or effects designer. I don't know whether that would have made that much difference to the price. But yeah, it's a boutique thing. But we'll get back to it. So that's the chorus flanger. The delay, if we just... This is like a ping pong delay. We've got mix control. And it will do that nice grungy. Take that down a bit. And again, there are three modes to this. So the first mode is more of this sort of your straight delay. Second mode is more of a bucket brigade, kind of lower fi. with some kind of, sounds like there's a sort of bandpass sidechain on it, so it drops a bit at the low end, and then the final mode is more like tape, so circuit emulation of that. And so probably about, it sounds like it's about 500 milliseconds or so, maybe 750 milliseconds. Again, would have been nice to see maybe another mode which dropped the fidelity and gave us a little bit more delay time, because it's always nice to play. But the thing that's really interesting about the delay is it's got this freeze mode. If I go back into, if I press and hold and go back into regular mode, let's turn it up a bit and do it. I can freeze that, and that's really nice because means I can bring that in and out. And I was thinking, oh, it'd be so good if this switched off. What you can do, if you switch off the delay, it will now hold. So we've got to kind of freeze and hold. But again, you know, if there was a foot switch input or just something that means I didn't have to use two hands, would be much nicer, I think. So now we've got the freeze, we can bring that in, and then we could perhaps pop in. So quite nice, and then obviously we can hand tune those if that's what we want. Just pressing the delay again will let it fall away naturally. Now, you know, I've not seen that in an effect in a delay before, and I really like that. It's a very sort of crusty way of creating these kind of beds, almost not quite a looper, but again, you could imagine if there was a little bit more delay time in there, we could create some even more interesting things. So that's just one thing that, you know, would be nice to have. So now let's get on to the spring. If we turn these modules off, we take the spring on. We'll start with just the amount. We can drive it quite hard into the spring. It does get a bit, the distortion into these two isn't quite as nice as what it is into the spring, but what's interesting about this is we've also got an adjustable pre-delay, but there's no ability to kind of have any low cut or EQ or break it out or break the circuit in here, because we've just literally got stereo in, stereo out. I think the way that they're lined up inside is in parallel, so that's it. You can't change the routing or anything. But one thing that is very cool is you can modulate the pre-delay, and I'll press and hold again, and we can change the waveform of that, I think. A bit hot going in, and there's some really interesting effects you get with that. And again, we can modulate, we can change the wave. We get, that sounds like a square wave, and then we can go into random. Which is, again, quite an interesting and unusual effect. I don't really know of anything that that does that. I mean, it's just a sort of interesting take on things, you know, because essentially these are quite simple effects, but giving those additional modes and ability to change the waveforms just kind of brings it into a different area of creativity. Although, again, you know, we can't tempo sync or access any of those, so anything that you use with this is going to have to be done by ear. So I also wanted to just show you what was going on in terms of frequency response, because I did notice there was something a little bit unusual. So if I just come in, let's go to just a regular waveform on the chorus flanger. Now I'll take that out. You can see there's a plenty of bottom end there. Switching in just seems to tame it just a little tiny bit. So depending on the sounds, you know, if you're using it for basses, you might not get it just seems to sort of, I don't know whether that's the D2A conversion into it or whether that's just the nature of the stereoness, but it just drops the low end a tiny bit, something to be aware of. It doesn't seem to be the case in the delay, but it does seem to happen in the chorus flanger. So I'm just going to bring in my trusty bass, which I haven't played for ages. I hope it's in tune, and I'm going to plug that in because I want you to hear what it sounds like on something other than this synth. I mean, at the moment, I'm just doing some basic stuff. So let me just put, if I unplug the synth and I plug the bass in, I'm going to have to probably increase the gain considerably here. So let's just turn that one on. Get some quite extreme stuff. If you want something a bit more subtle, you've got the feedback and the depth to change with. So it's almost enough gain. It feels like, you know, this is a passive bass, so it's probably not quite giving it enough gain in here, but it is possible if we, you know, maybe beefed it up via preamp. I am hearing a little bit of interference there. Or not interference, but switching. But I have got the gain up really, really high. And in fact, that's one thing that's quite interesting about this synth, about this effects. If I just unplug that and go back into, let's just plug the synth back in. When you've just got a little bit of signal coming in, and maybe bring the delay in as well, you can create some quite nice self noise. Particularly if we go into, let's just switch this into random. Get some really interesting harmonics. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear that there. It's quite quiet. But you can generate these sort of really otherworldly sort of self-noise almost sort of soundscapes, which would be great for just sampling little bits of ambience. And in fact, that's the thing I found with this effect generally, is you tend to get really into some really creative musical spaces. A couple of gotchas. If I just put the reverb on and turn the amount right down, I still get a little bit of bleed there. Not so much with the delay. If I turn the delay on, that's actually very clean. Obviously, the chorus flanger, that's going to happen anyway, because even if everything's at sort of 0, you get this stereo widening type of affair. It's kind of like the manual control, I guess. It's quite interesting. Again, probably quite handy for recording textures and whatnot. Really like, but I think ultimately it sounds great. Yes, it is a bit expensive. It's quite quirky. It doesn't have a lot of the features that maybe you'd like in something that's more associated with modular synthesis, you know, in terms of tempo syncing. There's no tap tempo for the delay, but it's very short delay really. But somehow it has a thing, you know, and that's the one thing that Dreadbox stuff has, a thing. It has this thing that allows you to kind of just get inside it and make music with it, and that's the thing I really like. So if I come back to my overhead shot here, just sort of build up a texture. I mean, this is the thing that I really like about it. get that freeze going. You know, you kind of, you see what I mean? It just starts to... I just kind of, I like where it takes me musically. I like the fact that it gives me these kind of unusual spaces. And yeah, the argument is, yes, I'm sure there are individual units that would be cheaper than this. And when you consider, this is the thing that I find kind of hard to reconcile, unfortunately. This is similar in price to this. And this is a complex thing with a lot more moving parts, a lot more electronics, presumably. So I'm guessing, you know, this is essentially a little bit of a victim of the fact that it uses hard to source ICs or expensive individual components. So yes, it's expensive, and I get all of that, and that's the shame really, because it would be really nice to see this in the hands of more people. But ultimately, it's quite special as well. So sometimes special things cost a bit more. I don't really know how to reconcile that really. It's just, yeah, it costs a bit more than perhaps you'd like. So I've got everything set up, a different setup, because I thought it'd be interesting to see what it was like, you know, maybe combining a few more things, having an effects end going on. So a quick look, I've got the drum brute impact, which you can probably just see there, and I've got a little Mackie mixer over here, which I'm just bringing everything into here and then having effects end going into the hypnosis and returning it back. I've also got the Erebus running a little sequence just straight out of the drum brute. So let's just see. So let's just see what happens when I press go. So that's the drum machine. It's quite interesting what happens if we do a bit of... this is the chorus flanger. It's great on rhythm. I like that. Anyway, let's come back. We'll bring my bass synth up. Freeze that. Like that. I can take that out, so I'll take this back into a more of a bass sound. Got the snare coming out on just on a separate aux. Oh, that's fun. Right, stop. So you can see it's possible to create a kind of more complex kind of setup, running this with effect sends, and it will integrate nicely. You don't have to just have it in line. So I guess it just comes down to whether or not this is something that you'd want in your setup. As I've said, it is expensive, so that's going to be a bit of a consideration, and there's not much I can say about that. But I will say it does sound really good, and it's quite a creatively inspiring unit. I'm sure there are other creatively inspiring units that cost a lot less, but the one I'm reviewing today certainly has that. And there's something about all of the sounds when you're feeding it in with the freeze and the harmonics that you can get. You can create some very powerful sort of soundscape stuff with very limited input source sounds. You know, most of the stuff I was running in through this was just a sawtooth. You know, there was nothing else really going on in terms of modulation or whatever. So you can get some very powerful sounds out of it. I like it, but I am aware that it is a bit expensive. Anyway, that's it for this time. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.